Okay, in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at UFC Fight Night Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov, which takes place in Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to be comparing it to the upcoming pay-per-view of UFC 311, which takes place in Sydney, Australia. And I'm going to be explaining why you'll notice some trends that are pretty blatantly obvious in the quality of these two cards side by side. We're going to go through each fight, compare them where they are on the card, and then we're going to bring it all together with a little bit of a reason or coming up with a hypothesis of why I believe Saudi Arabia card is 10 times better than the pay-per-view coming up, even though we have to pay $80 for this very much mid card. So we'll start with the main event. Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov and Dricus Du Plessis and Sean Strickland. Obviously, the title fight implications of Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland, I would say, gives it the edge in terms of funness. Dricus also beat Izzy, and Strickland, this rematch is interesting, but it is a rematch that we've already seen before, and Izzy is a big draw. So, in terms of non-title fight main events, this fight night definitely has a really solid one. So I'll give the edge to Dricus Du Plessis versus Sean Strickland because it's a title fight and because I do believe it's more interesting as well. We go to the co-main event: Sharpute Magomedov versus Michael Venom Page, and Weili Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. So in my opinion, this is bias. Michael Venom Page versus Sharp Magomedov is 100 times more interesting than Weili Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. But I will give it a break because it is a title fight. Two title fights on the card. That is cool. That it does give it a certain amount of hype to begin with, as long as you have a good base undercard, especially with the female title. It does not hold the same weight, in my opinion. Then we go down one more: Sergey Pavlovich versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And then we get to the point where it gets a little odd. We get to Justin Tava versus Taliesin Teixeira. And then you start to realize that it starts to fumble a little bit. It starts to come apart. 311 starts to look shit right away. The feature fight starts to look shit. It makes this card look ass. The feature fight of this fight night is Sergey Pavlovich versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, which is a banger. Sergey Pavlovich is a freaking monster who hits hard as fuck and is super hype. He's lost some hype after his last couple matches, but he's not Justin Tafa. So already we're seeing a big difference, in my opinion, in terms of hype for these two cards. And then we get to this: Said Nurmagomedov versus Vinicius Oliveira. I won't say that Said Nurmagomedov is some hype guy like his people, because he's not. He's fairly mid compared to the others. But Vinicius Oliveira has a lot of hype as a prospect. He's had very fun fights so far. He's a very wild style. He has like one of the knockouts of the year last year. He's crazy. That flying knee was nuts that he hit on Sopage. So this fight is sick on the main card of this fight night. And you'd expect something better on a main card of a pay-per-view. But then we get to Jimmy Crute versus Rodolfo Bellato. And that is just not the same. It's not as good to me. It's not not nearly as good as Vinicius Oliveira testing himself against a Nurmagomedov. It just doesn't hit the same. I get the Australia thing, but at the same time, none of these people are from Saudi Arabia. Like, I get this, it's that part of the world. But if we're pandering this much, I don't see the point in making this a pay-per-view and not just making the Saudi Arabia one a pay-per-view, putting a title fight on that and making that the pay-per-view. I'd much rather pay money for this fight card over 311 any day of the week. So then we get to the start of the fight, or the card, and we get Muhammad Naimov versus Con Offley, and we get Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. Both of these aren't amazingly hype matchups in any way, but I will say I'm more hyped for Con Offley coming off the Contender Series to try to test himself against Muhammad Naimov in the UFC besides Jake Matthews versus Francisco Prado. Every single fight on the main card, in my opinion, is a lot more exciting on this fight night in Saudi Arabia than UFC 311 besides the main event. If the main event was not Sean Strickland versus Dricus Du Plessis, it would be a shit card that no one gives a fuck about at all. So why do we have to pay $80 for it? And why does Saudi Arabia get so much more in terms of star value on their cards? They get their shit stacked up. And I'm not sure 100% why. There's no real way to tell for sure. But there's some theories. Dana White could definitely be in deals with Saudi Arabia to get some heavy money. And this could play a big role into the fight with Tom Aspinall versus John Jones. These princes like to throw fucking money at fighters and fights to make them happen because they want big fights to happen in their country. They like the attention it brings to their country big time. They do it with boxing all the time now. Big, insane amounts of money into boxing all the time. They're definitely, in my opinion, doing the same shit in the UFC. And I believe Dana White is willing for this to happen. It's a little weird with his insanely pro-America views that he wouldn't stack up American cards a little bit more. But I get not doing Australia, sure, but some American cards are shit too. And these Saudi Arabia fight nights are always insanely good. You've never had a Saudi Arabia fight night that wasn't stacked to the brim. Robert Whittaker versus Ikram Aliskerov was on there as well. These are... Oh, I didn't even talk about Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz. I just skipped over that. That's crazy work. So yeah, we also have another fight on this card, on the main card of this fight, on this fight night. Ikram Aliskerov versus Andre Muniz, who is also a super hyped up prospect, besides the KO to Whittaker, which you can't really blame him. Who has a lot of hype, a lot more hype than Jimmy Crute, I would think. So this is interesting. Also, that's just another fight to throw in there that I just overlooked for some reason. But yeah, it's a little strange that we have to pay $80 for UFC 311 when Saudi Arabia gets this stacked fight night. I'm glad we don't have to pay for it. That's nice. I'm cool with that. But just swap them then, in my opinion. So I don't feel weird paying $80 for pretty much one fight. That's all. It's that's all it's worth. $80 for a fight, and that's it. I wouldn't do that, really. I don't feel good about doing that. I'm already very low on money as it is. So I don't want to pay $80 for one fight. And UFC 312 is also not looking that good. I would say just disperse this talent a little bit. Just a little bit. We could make 311 sick if we just put two of these fights on that card. If we put Sergey Pavlovich on that card versus Jerzy Rozenstruik, this card is still sick, and then that pay-per-view just becomes infinitely better, even with just one. I understand it. I understand the pandering. I don't hate it, to be honest. The start time is low-key sweet for me for these sick cards. I like starting early. But it's just a little strange, and I wanted to highlight that in this video, that it's blatant, and they're not trying to hide it, and I believe it's going to get worse, and at some point, I believe that the UFC will be fully funded by Saudi Arabia, as it seems to be as it's going right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if John Jones versus Aspinall is in Saudi Arabia, or other huge fights like that. Would not be surprised at all. And Saudi Arabia seems to be, in the Middle East in general, seems to be taking over combat sports extremely fast. And I'm not just talking Saudi Arabia. I'm talking Abu Dhabi as well. Every single card is stacked. That region just gets insane cards for whatever reason. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that and show why it's a little bit weird and complain a little bit about the price of pay-per-views for the talent involved. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'll see you soon.